Hello, I'm Dr. Pamela Ruegg, and I hold the David J. Ellis Chair in Large Animal Clinical Sciences and Antimicrobial Resistance at Michigan State University. And today, as part of our continuing series about antibiotic usage on dairy farms, we'll be talking briefly about how antibiotic usage is measured on dairy farms. Now, there's lots of misunderstandings about the amount of antibiotics that are used on dairy farms, and I think part of that misunderstanding comes from the fact that there's so little data that people have access to reference and understand how antibiotics are used. Antibiotic usage is required to be recorded on dairy farms, but it's rarely summarized and compared among farms. And that kind of results in the old adage of, if we don't measure it, we can't manage it and optimize it. So researchers have developed several metrics which can be used to assess antimicrobial usage. And it's important that we understand the differences among those metrics because they're used to meet different objectives and their results mean different things. For example, most countries, including the United States, summarize the amount of antibiotics which are sold for use in food-producing animals. And the FDA releases a report on the amount of sales of antibiotics in food-producing animals each year. Now, that report summarizes sales for several species of animals, but it combines all cattle together. So antibiotic use in beef cattle and dairy cattle is all combined. So the amount of antimicrobials used on dairy farms can't be easily summarized by that report. However, that report also contains a summary table that shows the amount of antibiotics that are sold by route of administration. Now remember, almost all antibiotics used on dairy farms are given either through the intramammary route or by an injectable route. The other routes aren't legal for most antibiotic usage in adult dairy cows. And if you look at the summary national data released for 2021, you'll see that the intramammary and injectable routes together account for less than 6% of all antibiotic sales in the US for all summarized species, which I think can lead us to conclude that a relatively small proportion of overall antibiotics sold for use in food-producing animals in the US are used in dairy cattle. Now, that's national level statistics, but on an individual animal basis or an individual farm basis, antibiotic usage can be summarized using various metrics. The process is the same regardless of the metric used. First of all, you pick a metric, and then you sum up the amount of antibiotics using the farm records and divide by some sort of animal per time unit. So for example, there's three commonly used metrics by researchers. One is called the defined daily dose, and sometimes that's called the defined animal daily dose. And that is summing up the number of doses given on a farm and then dividing by some unit of animals. So it may be the defined daily doses per cow per year or the defined daily doses per 1,000 animal units. Second metric that's often used is just to sum up the kilos or pounds of antibiotics used on a farm and divide by the kilos or pounds of animal per year. And then a third metric that's often used is to count up the number of courses or protocols used per animal per year. In all the instances, we sum up some measure of antibiotic use and divide by animal time. In my opinion, the actual metric used doesn't matter much. What really matters is the accuracy of the count of antibiotics, which depends on the accuracy of the underlying records. Now, we'll be talking about antibiotic usage on dairy farms using the defined daily dose metric in future videos, so I want to briefly describe it. Summarizing antibiotic usage using a defined daily dose is pretty simple. It basically answers the question of how many FDA-approved doses per day does an average cow receive in the time period we're measuring. So the first thing we have to do is determine what is an FDA-approved dose, and that is simply the dose that's on the label. So for example, if an intramammary tube says give 1 tube at 12-hour intervals for 1 day, that means 2 tubes in 1 day. A defined daily dose is 2 tubes. In contrast, if you have an intramammary tube that says give 1 tube every 24 hours, the defined daily dose is 1 tube. So we would simply sum up the number of defined daily doses and divide it by the number of cows. So how we interpret that on a herd basis is simply if we've used an average of 5 defined daily doses per cow per year, it means that the average cow received 5 days of FDA-approved doses of antibiotics in that year. We'll talk more about that in future videos. While this might seem a little complex, understanding how to use these metrics and understanding how antibiotic usage on our farms compares to other similar farms is really important for us to understand how to optimize antibiotic usage on farms and maintain the welfare of our cows.